Going live. What's happening? Benton here. What's today? Tuesday? Just hanging out in a Nissan Versa parked on the streets of Los Angeles. It's my honor and privilege to address the fine folks that are willing to listen to my discourses. What a blessing indeed. And yes, I at times am cantankerous towards the audience, and I've come to accept, perhaps in the context of mastery of self, I'm coming to understand that that's just probably how I am, a bit cantankerous. So mastery of self, juxtaposed with, um, this realm, uh, having mastered seemingly the arts and sciences of having mastered the masses via psychological and other means of control. And, make no mistake, folks. Make no mistake. It sounds like a sales pitch. What is he selling? Uh, but it seems to be one or the other in this world, this vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. It seems like one does serve one of two masters, a binary, as it were. So it seems that I have the opportunity to continue along a path of mastery of self, or, uh, the crossroads. Not that this is the crossroads, or, the alternative is to see, my psychology and my energies, my efforts, my toils, my emotions, everything about this human experience being mastered, by the system, on behalf of the system, for the system's benefit. Um, so I'm seeing now that, and I'm also, in a review of how in the world did Benton, yes, we're going third person, how did Benton in all of his earlier iterations, and, reborn in a way, right? Um, with the recent true knowledge of self achievement unlocked within this, what some may refer to as a video game. Well, there's certainly video game elements to whatever this experience is, right? And it's difficult with the in formulating the discourse, in real time. I'm attempting to avoid, the collective aspects, right? And so addressing the individual experience, which is the one that I am seemingly having, right, Benton, and then, setting aside the philosophy of solipsism, willing to at least accept, perhaps only for the purposes of discussion, or dare I say, a thought experiment, the idea that the vast majority, probably not all, but the vast majority of, the other beings in meat suits wandering around are in fact, endowed with at a minimum, endowed with a Nancy Pelosi's MS-13 spark of divinity. Am I making any sense? I've noticed with my long history of live streaming, especially the hotel days, I would get to a point where it's like I may have said something quite profound, or I don't even know if it made sense. It's So that one may not have made sense. I'm not sure how profound any of that was. And, I committed myself long ago to working within myself, uh, and it's a similar, well, let's not even go there, but, I've dedicated myself, committed myself, right? Come what may, many, many years ago, to mastery of self. And this is the advanced course, as I've been saying for quite some time. And I forget myself in this world, again, back to the world mastering the self versus self mastery. Um, I forget myself a lot of times, and I'm sure that's I would assume that has a lot to do with the delusory nature, the waking dream surrealistic aspects. Unreality plays a big part there. And so, what I was trying to get at on yesterday's live stream, and that was mostly non-tent, and I think mostly I just needed to talk. So, thanks to whoever hung out for that. And did I lose my train of thought? No, I didn't. So, the spiritual side of things that I wanted to talk about yesterday is that as a once I got into my 30s, I would say, and maybe this was probably a theme all the way through my life, um, as an adult, especially. But in a lot of ways, now again, there's always exceptions to everything. Show me a human, I'll show you a hypocrite. That includes me. But overall, I've mostly concerned myself with spiritual progress and the spiritual side of things, which sounds ridiculous because there's been lots of times that I've fallen away from that only to then seemingly be brought back to spiritual matters or, with my own path, a lot of, arrogance and becoming quite big headed and prideful, only to almost immediately get what the internet calls instant karma, right? This along many, many cycles of puffed up with pride and then, humbled or humiliated, very similar term, actually. Um, and so, really, what I'm telling people, because sometimes my arrogance and my vainglory is my vanity. It shows through a little too strongly. It's always there, but then, folks, every once in a while, somebody wants to take me to task about my arrogance and pride, as if I'm unaware, that I'm arrogant and prideful. Right? It's like really. Um, so I'm talking about it. So then it's a challenge of, well, what are you going to tell me about pride and arrogance? Like I'm pretty sure I have, amongst the highest levels of of experience in these matters, and really, what it is many, many, many times experiencing humiliation, and again, back to the system mastering the individual, or more correctly, from the perspective of the system, corporatizing these individual work units, right? Because when we think about the collective versus the individual, the individual being me or you or another person, that's a discrete individual unit that can be addressed, from the perspective of the system, like an area of a computer code or memory, right? Um, those have addresses, so the computer is able to address the memory or address what's in the memory. And then of, each little individual bit and byte, right? So, at the machine level, they call this like assembly language. And some of this I've forgotten, and I'm not trying to give a computer lesson here, but, you know, supposedly, eventually it gets down to zeros and ones. And, um, this is probably a poor analogy now that I think about it, but so the system is addressing, the zeros and the ones, the individuals, and it's doing that over time in a way to, and what I refer to as the corporatization, is to the more the system is able to have individuals in the collective, right? Which I mean the masses of people, the underclass, mostly talking about America, or we could, extend that to North America. That's fine. And so what works for the system is to push all of that, to group all of that as much as possible into a an addressable space, right? So like the American people, but then within that, oh, the American people who like the color blue and like this one particular party, particular political party. Oh, maybe with this, so maybe that's 30%. Oh, we got another, or 33% or whatever. Oh, we got another 33% that like the color red and Donald Trump and all of these things and war and of course the color blue people like war also. Maybe a little different flavor of war. See, so when I say that, and now, and real quick, I want to divert into this. Hopefully, I can get back onto my main points. This is one of the things I'm trying to show about the psychology of the so-called left-right paradigm. When I accuse accurately the Republican Party of being warmongers, immediately, now this is how the mind control works: is we go to the other side, the opposite side, as if I'm now saying, well, they don't want war. Like, oh, of course they do. They want a different. It's just a different war, and it's it's a different thing, right? But you can see how the psychology, the code is already installed to have the stimulus and the response. And so there's no thought in that. It's I've said a thing, that's the stimulus, and then the individual just responds based on the mind control. And not the people that come to this channel. I'm speaking more broadly. Although it happened in my brain, so maybe it does happen in the listener's brain to some extent. And so, what Krishnamurti, right, Jiddu Krishnamurti, who I've learned a lot from, would say is that's not a problem unless the individual is unaware that that's happening and is then thus being. Now I'm adding my own stink to what Krishnamurti said, because the individual is thusly being operated by the system, and that's what I'm talking about in this binary. The mastery of self seems to be necessary or required in order for me to operate myself, which is the only way to not be operated full time by the system, because make no mistake, I'm certainly operated by the system, in various ways. Um, and I know that, and I don't know that that will ever, be 100%. I don't know that it will ever be possible to completely, divorce myself of that, or to totally, prevent that from happening. It'll be fun to find out as the full moon approaches. Also interesting. I believe I got to town here in Los Angeles on a new moon, and then now I'm reaching the phase of whatever this recent leveling up again, cheer the level up. And, I forget to apply my own, what I would like to be my own principles. Cheering the level up would be one, because I was doing some street preaching when I first got to town. It was later in the day than it's when I was, you know, forcing myself to stay up later. And I'm, I usually go to sleep closer to 8 p.m., which is still shockingly early, I understand, but several hours later than what I've been doing over the last however many years. And I ran into someone who claimed to also be a street preacher, but a person, a more, a very much, a Bible follower, right? Which I am not a Bible follower, and probably a churchgoer, but seemed like a decent fellow to have a conversation with. So we had probably a couple of hour conversation. But and this is where I'm just simply not that intelligent in the moment a lot of times, and it's probably my own density, right? Just being dense in general. So, but I figure out things through my analysis on the back end. So, and I realized at a certain point, describing and quantifying, especially the recent true knowledge of self, not a single cheering of the level up. And why is that? And what I'm understanding is, my opinion is, folks, anybody who would be, open to a possible friendship or acquaintanceship, in my mind, would be excited, or at least be, oh, that's, well, there you go, right? Some version of oh, okay, well, that's great. Even if it's just a non, reacting to what I'm saying, even with skepticism, or this person was trying to question me to get me in gotcha moments, which is hilarious. I'm way too strategic for that. But, um, in not always, but in a lot of cases, it's jealousy. And, I'm not that I've never experienced jealousy, but I'm historically not a jealous person. If somebody else showed up and was plausibly claiming, self-realization or true knowledge of self, I'm pretty sure I would, find a way to be happy for them. Again, cheering the level up. And to me, this is further proof that it's not, society certainly can never be what it's attempting to pass itself off as, which is some version of, we are all in this together type shit. And, of course, just at a basic human level, of course, I would have, well, and let's leave me out of it. Of course, one within the collective or within the masses, the huddled masses would, of course, have regard and, you know, some base level modicum of decent regard towards the humanity of another, right? And that's a key term, humanity, because this notion of the degeneration of society over time becoming less moral, arguably, and more prone to engaging it in morally repugnant behaviors, let's call it that. And then the infighting, the all of the things that go on in families, and then with the personality disorders off the charts, and then children being raised by people with personality disorders, and on and on and on and on. And so what the system seems to have done, in my view, is the system operating by extension, what would be a block, right? BLOC, and again, an addressable, taking all of those individual units, and then making a corporatized, a block where, more or less the entire block, if you take out one of those individuals, the individual will mostly behave as the block behaves, if that makes sense. So this is something the system is sort of able to operate, by extension. So, that's the motivator, is, so yeah, willing to treat me with regard, willing to treat me, based on my own humanity, um, but only as works within the system, only as, and I hesitate to say benefits them, but certainly, again, now we're back to the another binary, which is the courage versus the cowardice. You know, how many people are just going to call their own shot and say, well, yeah, I do think it's, interesting, and if Benton has had, this spiritual path, and he's worked towards things, and he's had this recent new understanding. A person can always reframe it into their own sort of understanding, right? And then, so that's positivity, by the way, folks. That's what I'm describing, is positivity. It's attempting to find, something to sort of a common ground. And well, this person is, Benton here is clearly, all lit up and on fire with whatever this is, trying to find something to latch onto. And that's, again, back to the mastery of self. That's always ran through the lens of being mastered by the system, meaning, oh, okay, it's not a positive motivation. Again, toxic positivity, it's a fear based, what might the other person, in this scenario, who, heard my interesting discourse, he became interested. He wanted to spend time talking to me, right? Now he had his own agenda and own reasons for that, but see, I'm the stimulus or the catalyst, right? Um, which is also interesting. Um, and then it's some version also of the system sort of tearing me down to size. Like, well, we got to get this one. Look at this one. He's expanded. He's rising. His vibrations are rising. Right. He's leveling up. And instead of cheering that, right, that progress in a open, free society, where at least in the past, society was a little more willing to pretend like, well, yeah, that's weird activities potentially, but to at least, you know, somewhat agree that there may be some merit in that. What we see with the authoritarian, as the system, you know, and this is a key point that I'm just now hitting upon. The system's not authoritarian. Well, okay, the system is authoritarian. The point I'm making is the degree to which the system it's operating the populace in an authoritarian fashion. So it's not a, oh, we have this wonderful, moral, good-hearted, you know, group of human beings, and they're just left to their own devices. They create proper societies, they do the right thing, they treat each other well. But then, dun dun dun, here's the level boss from the video game. It's the United States government, right? And the rawr. It used to be, the bastion of freedom, and then it's been hijacked by bankers and corporate fat cats and industrialists and capitalists, and now it's become authoritarian, right? It's like, well, that's one way to look at it. That seems to be the way that it portrays it. What I would say is that what suits it now that it is operating, right, by proxy or by extension, now that it's formulated these blocks of humans and is operating them, right, like a game in a way, right, like I don't know enough about the types of games, but Farmville type shit or whatever. Who knows? Or one of them army games, one of them war games, strategy type games. And um, yeah, it's actually that over time the people are having more authoritarianism installed into them. Meaning over time, the and let's just call it Americans. The Americans, if we go back in the official fiction long enough, it's like, oh, these people were very intolerant of authoritarianism. And then over time, the amount of authoritarianism that each individual is willing to tolerate and also expected to tolerate just to meet societal expectations. What percentage of I got to write this down. What percentage of authoritarianism am I expected to tolerate on an ongoing basis simply to fit into society? I got to write this down. What level? I mean, this is a important question. What level of authoritarianism is the average American? Now, most people would say, well, none. And I would say, well, what are you talking about? That's crazy. What level of authoritarianism is the average American? I don't think expected is the right word, but I need to get this written down. Expected to, I'll change that later, to tolerate in order to uh, conform to society, to the present society, to conform to the present society. Because it's certainly greater than zero, right? So, I mean, what is the percentage right now? What's the tyranny level? What level of authoritarianism are the individuals who comprise the masses tacitly accepting? Tacitly is a good word. I don't know, 43%. I mean, it's probably far greater than that. I mean, that's just a number that sort of leaps to mind. But yeah, I now got to look up the meaning of the word tacit. Implied but not made explicit, especially through silence. Tacitly accepted authoritarianism. Implied but not made explicit, especially through silence. And I think a lot of the silences, it's the well, you have to, like, you have to, well, I got kids, like, I have to feed my kids, like, that's a just tacitly going along with authoritarianism. Well, I have to do this, that, and the other. So, you know, I guess freedom, so called, is out of luck, right? And so that's where the authoritarianism comes from. It doesn't come from golly gee willikers. what happened? I've just been going to work and punching a clock and raising my family, and I wake up one day and it's a fucking tyrannical authoritarian government. Like, how did this happen? Well, it happened because the system is operating you, sir. And the system is operating you based on, it knows, it has some estimate of what is the level of authoritarianism that you will accept today. And then it probably has a notion of, well, what level will you accept in 5 years? And then it's got goals. And what would be the goal of the system would be, well, to have Americans accept 100% authoritarianism. And this is what progressivism is. And this is, part of the critique of the left, right? Which is also called progressivism. Like, well, okay, what is progress towards what? What is being progressed towards? Um, well, progression towards towards the individuals who comprise the masses being tolerant of a 100% tyrannical and authoritarian society, right? So what did I just say? I got to make more notes here, or I get to, I should say. Um, I already forgotten the first part of that. Tyrannical, something about 100% acceptance of tyranny. Anyway, it doesn't. I mean, I guess worst case scenario, I could go back and listen to this. Not that I will. It doesn't matter in the long run. What's the difference? What's the difference, people? What time is it? 6:24 Pacific. And then in inverted world, and this is a reminder of just how key this, and this is why this is the advanced course. I've never heard this internalization versus an external. I've never heard this anywhere. Internal versus external. This is yet another internalization versus an externalization. People are internalizing what should be externalized, and they're externalizing what should be internalized. So, what the value assigned to the external is, oh my goodness, authoritarian, tyrannical government and society. Yeah, that's you, right? And I don't mean you, the listener, right? That's the Spider-Man meme. That's individuals being operated psychologically by a system that may or may not be tyrannical and authoritarian by its own nature. I suspect it's whatever it needs to be to achieve its desired goal, which is to disprove the validity and the authority of what I am, which is one with the most super intelligent force of love and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency, a quickening spirit. Right. It's very interesting. And I'm certainly looking forward to, so I'm seem to be entering into the just me personally, into the something I picked up from Fight Club, which I'm sure comes from, that has to be, the idea of the system sort of breadcrumbing or putting these things out, you know, this has to be some sort of deeper idea that originates elsewhere, but it's the idea of, to let that which does not matter truly slide. And I seem to be on the verge of that. And, part of that for me is manifesting as a lack of motivations in some regards, because I am, pretty task oriented. I'm typically on top of things. Again, show me a human, I'll show you a hypocrite. But generally speaking, I have a motor. I'm good at getting shit done. Overall, so-called productive. Although even that's, as the system operates the individual and by extension the masses. Just hearing the word productive, well, that has to be in the context of employment or one's own, climbing of the corporate ladder or one's own business. That's the only productivity. Well, yes, in a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, you're right. In the context of that thing, productivity, air quotes, that's only ever in the context of business. And again, making rich people richer. You know, just to again back to the people tolerating authoritarianism. What about the tolerance of making rich people richer with one's own efforts? You know, um, and it will sound like a cope, uh, but something sounding like a cope. And again, like what I've said is basically what's not a cope. I mean, if you just look at logically, what does a cope represent? I mean, it's pretty much all of life as a cope, as far as I can tell. But, or I should say, just typical modern life. And I need to not rub my eyes. So let me stop that. I failed to. I could have went over and rinsed the sleep out of my eyes, and instead I'm doing this. Back to the to let that which does not matter truly slide. It's like, yeah, my eyes will be fine in the long run, or not, but probably be okay. Sunlight, very good for the eyes, I must tell you, as um, being in motel rooms some of the time recently. I begin to notice at a certain point, oh, my eyesight's not doing so good. And my first thought is nutrition, but then it's like, well, wait a minute, I'm in here in the dark. So motel room never quite properly lit in my experience. But either way, I've been out in the sun battling. I can't even mention what I'm battling, but I'm taking advantage of the sunshine every day, certainly. And I will say this, beyond the healing of the Lord Christ Jesus that I have received, continue to receive in real time. Uh, Thank you, Lord. Thank you. You know, as far as what I have access to speed up or assist the healing, I found the sun to be number one. The sun in the sky to be number one. Number two would probably be proper sleep and proper rest, I would say. Certainly, last on the list for me would be modern medicine. In fact, if that would be the number one way to ruin one's health, I would say. And they say, well, it's already ruined. Okay, well, if you'd like to ruin it further so that rich people can get richer via medical coding and billing, then have at it. AMA your ass off. It's right there waiting for you. And I'm also observing again back to the individuals that comprise the masses being more tolerant of tyranny and just more tolerant of many things like this Martin Shkreli, the pharma bro. And I know there's another content creator that talks about him frequently. And you know he was supposedly the most hated man in America for a time, or that's how the media portrayals were. But so I don't know how many years ago that was that Mr. Shkreli bought. I don't remember the details, but somehow he was able to purchase the ability to jack up the price on an affordable medication. It went from like $10 a pill to like $750 a pill. That was treated at the time, and of course, pre-pandemic, that was treated at the time like just, oh, the horror. Can you believe somebody would be that evil? And now it's not that many years later. I don't know, 10 years, 50, whatever it is, and that level of greed, that seems to be normal now. That it seems to be like when the system, because there is some version of, yeah, we have a person to blame this on, this $750 a pill for this necessary medication. Apparently the people that have that, they have to have it apparently. And um it seems to me like your average person in 2025, you know, again, their response is going to be based on what do they believe they could lose, which that's a coward. It's going to be based on within, as the system operates them, right? As dystopia turns, as the delusion turns, it's the fear motivating the response of, well, what's in it for them to lose by way of response. So you might have some people who will express some version of consternation or, that's horrible. to do that. But assuming it's fully legal, because I think he went to prison for something else. I'm almost certain that that was all above board and considered legal, or at least enough, legal enough, right? And it seems to me like that would today be viewed as just more or less just the normal course of business. And so we can see the authoritarianism, the moral degradation, it actually advances, you know, shocking. It's quite rapid, shockingly so. And even, I still enjoy listening to some of these old Howard Stern, snippets. And I heard a little discussion of, the pat downs to get into the nightclubs in New York City, but this would have been like in the 90s, or oh well, if you go to the concert, now they pat you down. So that's an acknowledgement of up until that point there weren't really the pat downs. Now, so probably another example of what I'm speaking on here, which is over time the system operating the individuals that comprise the masses to, accept higher and greater percentage of overall authoritarianism and tyranny. To whereas nowadays it's just even if somebody is higher on the we love our freedom scale, everybody, it's just normal now. Take your shoes and your belts off because you're getting on a plane type shit. Whatever, whatever that is. And that's only ever going to progress over time. That's the part of what I wanted to write down. I couldn't remember. It had something to do with the progressive movement. So I think if I just write that down, the progressive movement. And then hopefully we can see how the so-called left-wing radicals and then the so-called right-wing radicals um, certainly work together to further install and be operated in a tyrannical authoritarian fashion. And the way I'm going to be living, the way I'm already living to some extent, but certainly once the little bit of money that I have is gone, and who knows with this car, and it's not a refuge anyway. There's certain pros to having a vehicle, and I don't drive this thing around. Once I get here, I just park it, and then I don't move it until they make me move it. There's some sort of event been set up in the park, so at some point, maybe a sign will be, uh, a placard will be displayed, and I will move somewhere else. But it's not some panacea or life raft. It's like, yeah, I do in some ways get more restful sleep, but also like I'm in the fetal position. I would prefer to stretch out, but then it's like, yeah, I can go stretch out, in the park or on the sidewalk, and then it's like, well, sprinklers waking me up maybe, or you know, now it's like, am I going to memorize which part of the of the park is sprinklered on a particular morning, right? Based on the day. Some people do. I'm probably not one of those people. Type shit. Um, but yeah, just the what I'm seeing to make the actual point is in the way people respond to me, and I'm going to chalk this up to I'm behaving in a less enslaved fashion in the public space. I'm behaving, in a way that's less tolerant of authoritarianism and tyranny than the average person. And what I'm seeing is these people actually becoming, now they're becoming's probably not the right word, but the tyranny and the authoritarianism that they've accepted within themselves, I seem to be a catalyst or a stimulus to where some individuals will then allow their tyrannical and authoritarian natures to come out. Now, some people are that way. Again, I've talked about, uh, this soul, sort of a soul trap notion, or just some idea that, spirits choose to come to this place. And some will say, oh, it's, to learn specific lessons and to grow and change and evolve and whatever. Yeah, well, maybe that's all fine and good. But The reality is the degenerated, the lower vibrational frequency beings, some of them will hear vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, and they're like, "Fuck yeah, that's my jam," and they're going straight for that. As soon they don't even need to hear the other options. They're like, "Yep, that's it. That's send me there." Right. And so that to me, and I'm just using this as a thought experiment, but that makes more sense to me. So yeah, some of these folks like they want to be authoritarians, you know. So some of these beings out here, even if they are, you know, at least a base level of Nancy Pelosi's MS-13 spark of divinity, like they still respond to and want to be authoritarian and tyrannical in a way, and you know they want to. Um, you know, whatever that security is, what, and I don't have any of this wiring, right? Whatever, I never have, whatever that, you know, is it just to feel safe and secure when they don't actually feel safe and secure? It's just a reason to trick oneself into believing that it's somehow reasonable to rest assured, right? Quote, rest assured that come on from advertising. You can rest assured. Okay, well, what if I rest assured and the shit goes wrong? What then, partner? I'm sure Google would tell me I can rest assured that this $100 for my defective phone that they promised me will show up in my account. That has nothing to do with whether or not, you know, whatever emotion the system is attempting to operate me, you know, via extension in the moment. Like that has nothing to do with what actually happens in practice. You know, surely the royal we can is able to figure that one out. You know, hopefully anyway. You know, there's a disconnect. The disconnect is those things are not connected. And then we get back to a very antiquated notion of the guarantee, right? The almighty guarantee of my youth, right? It's as if, you know, back to this the boomer notion, and it's not their notion, but the boomers, I guess, that was who was running around crowing about guarantees as if, you know, my word is my bond type shit. And, you know, rest assured, if anything goes wrong, it's backed by our guarantee, right? Like just imagine just going around like you know, some version of Robert Crumb's White Man from the comics, and just, you know, telling everybody to rest assured, you know, just with no irony, just completely fucking in full earnestness, strutting around with this maniacal grin plastered to his face, right? And apparently, Robert Crumb's dad was some, you know, central casting for like, you know, captain of the football team or, you know, senior class president type shit. But back then, you know, the white man's burden, right? And of course, that doesn't mean that; it means something else. But you know, kind of makes me think of that. It just, I think people would just lie. They would think it was a joke. You know, that's the levels of cynicism and all. It's just, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't be cynical. I'm more doing a thing to show how rapidly society has transformed in such a short period of time, right? And that's a feature, not a bug. You know, the bug was American exceptionalism. Well, actually not, but anyway, I'm really screwing up my analogies now, so I'll stop there with the analogies. It's funny, but yeah, this the or you know, it also reminds me of that. What was that movie with Jamie Foxx, the Oliver Stone movie about football, and uh, you know, they had a white quarterback that was going to be drafted number one overall, and you know, Jerry Maguire. Oh, it was Jerry Maguire. See, I'm intermixing. I'm mixing up two different football movies. No, it was Jerry Maguire, and you know, his only client after he left the after he quit his agent firm or whatever in protest, you know, was Cuba Gooding Jr. But then So Tom Cruise is trying to sign, uh, the big quarterback that's going to be drafted number 1 overall. And so the dad of the quarterback is like, we don't do contracts, but I'm going to give you my Texas handshake or whatever, and it's as strong as oak. Or if anybody remembers this scene, it's just, and of course, as we know, that guy screwed over Tom Cruise and went behind his back, and which I don't like that term either, but ended up signing with Jay Moore, whoever Jay Moore was playing in the movie. And apparently they do contracts, right? But just that earnestness, and that just as above board could ever be, that, we don't do contracts, but here's my Texas handshake. It's as strong as oak or whatever. It's like, yeah, you chop a motherfucking oak tree down, partner. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what is this? Right. That whole layer of America, I'm happy to see that die, because that was always hot garbage nonsense. Yeah, I bought into some of that stuff. I'll admit it. So when I talk about the individuals accepting more and more tyranny, it's like, yeah, I was willing to accept, a modicum of that sort of talk, right? And did internalize some of it, and much to my own chagrin now, certainly, would have expressed, along those, in that vein, right? To some extent, as a young person, certainly uh, not too long into life, hopefully. But and then back to the notion of humans, more or less watching what the other humans do, and then just aping or mimicking, right? Just kind of doing whatever everybody else does. So if I see these fucking boomer bozos strutting around about their guarantees, and you rest assured, and you know especially the notion of ideas being tied to a particular person and personality. That's something I've noticed in boomers. They get swept away in this. They get more swept away in the personality of the, whatever their favorite YouTube channel is that talks about geopolitics or whatever. It's like, okay, now I can't. God forbid if I'm silly enough to attempt a or if I'm willing to entertain a geopolitics discussion. It's funny. As soon as I'm making my points now we have to talk about the personality and biography of a YouTube content creator, instead of me being able to, sort of give my own thoughts on the matter, which would represent the creation of content. By the way, it's like, well, wait a minute. I understand there's a YouTube channel, but I'm right here, right now. Like, in a way, am I not doing that same thing? Like, why do we need to insert this other bozo? Well, but because that bozo has behaved based on these internalized notions of my guarantee, my Texas handshake, it's as strong as oak, and all this nonsense. And so we have boomers still running around, treating the world as if it's still that. And I've had another example of this recently. I wish I had written it down. I can't remember the specific example, but I saw it. I saw a phenomenon, and I was like, yeah, that's a person who's still behaving based on, a very outdated belief system that practically speaking simply no longer exists. It's quite incongruous, attempting to behave certain ways. Oh, I think it was, yeah, I remember what it was, but it wouldn't even, the explanation would be so difficult it wouldn't even serve a purpose. But yeah, okay. I remember. I remember what it is. And I will say, also watching the run against ICE that happened over the weekend, and watching mostly brown folks, and also I was giving a speech and watching this run happen. Right, the folks were running up the street and then hanging a right down Sunset, and I was giving a speech on Sunset. And not 5 minutes before, I talked about how protests, basically how the system, or the government doesn't do anything it's not forced to do. It speaks the languages of money and power. And then I talked about like the trucker convoys, and I said, it just turns into a party. And I said, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with having a party. It's just let's not don't allow that to fool the person, the individual, into believing they've taken an action that's going to change anything. Because whether it's this run against ICE or whatever we're talking about, any version of taking to the streets and walking around with, it's not going to do anything. That doesn't represent force. It's not power or money, right? And not 5 minutes later, two fucking flatbed trucks, with enclosed sides. It's a party. They got the big, gigantic Bluetooth speaker pumping out the jams. Woo! It's almost like a mini Mardi Gras, right? At fucking 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning or whatever it was, Saturday morning, probably Saturday morning, maybe been Sunday morning. And I just said, aha, I called it. That's it. And because I had to stop. It was so loud. I had to just stop what I was talking about and wait for it to pass. And then here came another one, but they didn't have the second truck lacked the Bluetooth. They didn't have the jams. I guess they were close enough to hear them. And so I call, and it's just like to see it unfold before my very eyes. I said, see, it's a party. I told you, it's a party. So I said, yeah, nothing wrong with a party. Yeah, go have fun, enjoy yourselves. You know, but to think for one moment that that's going to change anything whatsoever for the government or these, I really screwed up rubbing my eyes. I realize, fuck. Anyway, it'll be fine. Yeah, my hands aren't always. Now this is an argument for more frequent hand washing. My hands are not always in a state where they should be rubbed into my eyes, but we'll be okay. We'll be okay. Man, how silly. How silly of me. Anyway, hopefully I'm making sense. I think I am. I think I am. And so a lot of my critiques, particularly of MAGA or the, again, so-called conservatives, is that they still seem to be of the belief, right, that it's possible to just continue on in this life within corporate society, technological society, social media, women on social media, which is a very different thing than men or males on social media. Although, again, in 50 years, we'll all be chicks, right? That was a book title by Adam Carolla. As the males, increasingly become um, behaving more like would possibly be associated with female behavior. Um, but overall, what I'm talking about is, these conservatives, so-called conservatives, it's this failed notion that it's somehow going to be possible to sort of keep those traditions alive, from how their daddy was raised, right? And how their grandfather was raised and how their grandfather's father was raised, and the idea that that's going to continue unabated, and it's going to move through uh, a vacuum. Again, just present society, with the technology and the populace being ever accepting of higher levels of tyranny and authoritarianism within themselves, right? Within themselves. This is not going to be possible, folks. And I would say it's already gone. Like, it's practically speaking, it's gone. It's already doesn't exist. Yes, I've been to the middle part of the country. I've spent a lot of time in the middle part of the country. I understand there's absolutely lots and lots of people who are still living some version of what we're talking about with the old style, the older values, the outdated values, depending on, I'm not calling them that, depending on one's perspective. but look at the level of social problems. You know, it's not, it's no longer a time in American history where we can say, well, yeah, there are these social problems, but then look at all of these strong nuclear families that are living these, traditional type values. When we look at, people talk about the more rural areas, the less populated areas, that's just as much of a zombie hellscape as the big cities is. And that's another version of what I talked about when criticizing, like the Republicans. It's immediately interpreted as, oh, well, he's implying that the other side is above board and is not guilty in this. No, I'm not. Uh, so that actually, it's the same mechanism, right? It's the idea of showing a YouTube video or a news article, or God forbid, one of these middle of the country people actually goes to a large city. It's the publicizing of the problems, and then just, oh yeah, well, Democrat blue cities. Okay, well, I can go show you any number of meth zombie hillbillies living in trailers and go red states. Like, what's the fucking difference, man? Like, I've been to these places, I've met these people, right? I've spent, now not post pandemic, but especially pre pandemic, I spent a lot of time anthropologically and sociologically fucking up close and personal with various parts of the country, right? Pretty much everywhere but a couple of areas, right? And yeah, of course, there's lots of valid criticisms of the large cities. There's lots of valid criticisms of the middle part of the country, but of course, part of the system operating people by extension, when I've talked about it, is always give them something to blame. It's like, oh yeah, well, whatever the condition is of some bumfuck county in Mississippi or Missouri or Iowa or Kansas or any of these places in the country, there's a serious drug problem. Number one, there's a serious drug abuse problem in every county, effectively. Now, I'm sure you can find some exceptions. Montana, where it's, you know what I mean. Effectively, any county that has any sort of appreciable population, number one, you got a serious, intractable drug problem with no resolution in sight. That's baked into the cake at this point. Intractable and baked into the cake. But then, oh well, here's another TikTok. Here's another, YouTube video. Laugh at how, laugh at the San Francisco sidewalk poop, right? Oh look, here's a Waymo uh, being set on fire in Los Angeles. Yeah, those things are creepy. I mean, why wait for a riot to set that thing on fire? If Americans were at a lower level of tyranny, I believe that if just a Waymo just showed up day one of Waymo, they would be physically destroyed. If you did a thought experiment, in 1950 something, and just somebody plopped a fucking Waymo, and I understand people wouldn't be able to understand from the high tech nature of the computer side of things just what the fuck's going on, but just humor me for a moment. I'm pretty sure it would have been declared witchcraft and set ablaze pretty quickly, or some version of that, if the people weren't too fearful of what might happen if they attempted to intervene, right? Versus now, it's like actual traditional family values conservatives, MAGA types, so called, are like, because they are such in a rush to make fun of and to indict and criticize and blame everything on the Democrats. It's like, oh, the horror of burning down a fully automated self-driving taxi cab. It's like, well, wait a minute. That kind of sounds like probably a pretty decent idea. Yeah, in the context of what's going to be portrayed as a mostly peaceful protest, I understand why folks are annoyed, but just in a vacuum, the concept of setting a self-driving a robot. It's a robot driving around the city. I mean, let's just call it what it is. Yeah, it. I would say logically, it makes more sense to set the fucking thing on fire, right? And the fact that I didn't see any so-called conservatives saying, "Well, yeah, we're against these riots," but at least they've got the good sense to set the fucking creepy ass, robot taxis on fire. It has everything but what was that from Total Recall or whatever, the Johnny Taxi or whatever. It's got everything but the fucking humanoid aspect of Johnny in the seat there. The Carnival Barker version of whatever that was in that movie. I mean, it's got everything but that. Land of the Blinded has a way with words. Uh, Cube slaves in this black Saturn cube worshiping retard hell. Thank you. I like that. Well, I don't know that I like it, but I respond favorably to that comment, I should say. Got to write that down. Cube. Yeah, exactly. So now I'm going to go not starve to death on a street corner somewhere. Uh, and at this time, have not much idea what my life's going to look like, but I know what it's not going to look like: a cube slave in a black Saturn cube worshiping retard hell. It's like you want to talk. Oh, be in the cube. The I don't even want to try to put the mental energy into rephrasing all of that, but I think you know what I mean. Yeah, be in this world as described by Land of the Blinded, not of this world, right? Like I'm beginning to see that statement as meaning uh, not what we think it means, or not what the common sense, conventional wisdom of that would say it means. It's actually system speak. This in the world, not of the world. That's system speak. That's fucking mind control. That one statement's mind control. Mind control in the Bible. How about that? It's like, oh, you can just go ahead and go along with the black Saturn cube worshiping retard hell. Just uh, say a few incantations and declare you've been saved, and now you can go right back to the black Saturn cube worshiping retard hell, right? As you were. Like, yeah, I don't think it works that way. I don't think it works that way. Yeah, exactly. We got the laughter out of that. That's a delayed laughter, but I'll take it. There you go. Joe Moore eats the sunlight every chance he gets. Yeah, Land of the Blinded, and you know, and this is where I don't. As much as I might want to, I shouldn't even say that, but since I'm not going to pick and choose, which truth to manifest or respond to or acknowledge, or the correctness of a fact. Land of the Blinded wants parents portal souls to this hell. They have to become part of the hive mind because, well, I have to feed my family, etc. And we've seen that, in my opinion, we've seen that recently with a particular very popular in the space content creator that, out of my own reverence and respect, um, I'll not mention by name, but who certainly people could probably figure it out, who has pretty much meets that description as far as I can tell. Um, Again, I no dog in the hunt, not mad at you, right? To me, it's more of what's wrong with me that I don't just expect typical behavior. It's typical, right? Land of the Blinded, and it's also cowardly. Uh, you know what would be courageous is you know if the person's going to bring new souls here, then to not sacrifice them to Moloch, right? And because I've met Pete, there's not many, but I've met at least one person who was born and raised in America who was not sacrificed to Moloch. I mean, never had a birth certificate, social security card, none of it. And it's a very different type of human being, just totally different way of approaching things, just very different. Right. So it's possible, must have had some version of hippie parents, I'm assuming. I'm writing this down too. Once parents portal souls to this hell. Yeah. And that's a cope. And I get it. That's in order to cope and get through the fucking day. And to do what society expects them to do, because they're not going to be accepted if they you know don't. It's a requirement to sacrifice one's children to Moloch in order to be accepted. I mean, that's what it comes down to. That's the price of admission to being accepted into society, is to sacrifice one's children to Moloch. They have to become part of the hive mind. Yeah, there's or or force themselves into a growth and a change and an upheaval within themselves, right? So if they refuse, right, if they have the children but then refuse to sacrifice them to Moloch, that's going to be some version of, has the internal soil been tilled, right? Has the ground been prepared? Has the person done the foundational work within themselves to be able to go out into this world to care for, provide for, and guide and protect those children, as it's the duty and responsibility, but to do that while not being accepted by the people around them. See, and Christians can talk about persecution till they're blue in the face, then watch them all herd up, strength and numbers style, and all get into cliques and groups, right? And conform to those cliques and groups, right? Well, where's the persecution in that? And I'm not saying that they should seek persecution as if it was desirable, but it's like, hey, Christians, if you're not being persecuted, where is the proof that you're actually practicing your religion? Is what I would say. I mean, my reading of the book says that it's pretty much, it has to be a thing. So if the persecution ain't there, now don't tell me I'm not talking about the lefties and their opinions. I don't mean that. I'm talking about when you go to the store, when you go to your job, when you go here, when you go there. Uh, Persecution's not the order of the day. It's to be accepted with open arms, because whoever the other person is at the store or at the job, they probably have their own children that they've also sacrificed to Moloch. In fact, that seems to be the fabric that holds society together. Now that I'm really getting into this, right? Is that the case? That's at least a hypothesis, part of the hive mind. Very good. Very good, Land of the Blinded. Very good. Yeah. Yeah, if you don't wear the mask and go along, they turn on you, same as what happened to the Christ story. Well, exactly. And thank you, Land of the Blinded, because I'm now coming to the realization that Jesus in the Bible, being executed for sedition, which is to speak out against the government, the powers that be, is to be anti-authority and anti-establishment, right? And so it's somewhat occulted, but I'm now coming to understand and accept that the core tenet of Christ's teaching is to be exactly that, is to be anti-authoritarian. It's to be anti-establishment. It's to be anti-vacuous, delusory realm of business transactions. It's to offer oneself up for persecution by saying, I know I won't be accepted. Jesus in the story, Land of the Blinded. I'm not going strict historicity. In the story, Jesus would have known that he had zero chance of acceptance by the powers that be. So part of me talking about what I'm going into, it's a version of that. Now, I would assert, this is my opinion, I may find myself to be incorrect in the near future, but at least for now, it seems to me like the system, I'm not, certainly not a threat to the system, and I'm not, but my own, what my activities and the way I'm going to be living and the way I'm already living, could represent is certainly, and it's still backwards because the system is set up to oppose what I am. So I'm speaking based on the system and, the system speak. But I think the point I'm making is beginning to become clear that, you know, it's to live a conventional life in this system is to preclude oneself from following the teachings attributed to Jesus in the Gospels of the New Testament. And again, throwing out most of what Paul ever supposedly wrote. And again, we can debate whether or not these were real people and all. It's fine. Like, yeah, it's okay. I've got my own very specific thing that I'm doing within me, and it's not really important for other folks what that is. Um, I'm certainly closer to historical accounts being accurate, right? But with my own opinions and thoughts about them, certainly. But anyway, it's time to get out of here. Yep, y'all said it. I'm preaching to the choir. Thanks for watching. Bye.